The morning light filtered through the dusty window of my grandfather's workshop, a place that had always felt more like a sanctuary than a garage. Arthur wasn't just my grandfather. He was the architect of my character. He was the man who taught me that a person's worth wasn't measured by the weight of their wallet, but by the calluses on their hands and the integrity of their word. I grew up in that shop, surrounded by the scent of cedar shavings, motor oil, and the slow, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock he had restored in 1984. My parents had been a fleeting presence in my life, a series of postcards and broken promises, but Arthur was the bedrock. He was the one who showed me how to plane a piece of oak until it was as smooth as silk, and how to look a man in the eye when shaking his hand. He believed in things that lasted, tools made of steel, furniture made of solid wood, and promises made of honor. Then there was Celine. When I met her 8 months ago at a gallery opening, she seemed like a burst of color in my otherwise grounded world. She was vibrant, social, and always knew the best places to get a late-night cocktail. In the beginning, I mistook her superficiality for spontaneity. I thought her constant need for validation on social media was just a quirk of her generation, a harmless hobby. But as the months wore on, the cracks began to show. She didn't understand the silence of the workshop. She found the smell of sawdust offensive. She would sit on a vintage stool Arthur had carved by hand and complain about the lack of Wi-Fi signal, her thumb perpetually scrolling through a feed of people she barely knew and liked even less. I made excuses for her, telling myself that opposites attract, and that she brought me out of my shell. I didn't realize she was trying to pull me out of my skin. Arthur's decline was slow, then suddenly, agonizingly fast. In his final weeks, Celine's presence was a series of performative gestures. She would bring him flowers, take a selfie by his hospital bed while he was sleeping, and then spend the next hour in the hallway complaining about the depressing vibe of the palliative care unit. I was too drowned in grief to see it for what it was. I was focused on the man who had raised me, the man who was now a shadow of his former self, still trying to give me advice with a voice that sounded like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Find someone who values the silence as much as the song. Elias, he whispered to me one night. I thought he was talking about music. I didn't realize he was talking about my life. The day of the funeral was a stifling Tuesday in July. The air in the small chapel was thick with the scent of lilies and the collective sorrow of a town that had known Arthur for 70 years. I sat in the front pew, my suit feeling like a straitjacket, my throat tight with the eulogy I had rewritten a dozen times. Celine sat beside me, her black dress a little too tight for the occasion, her eyes darting around the room as if she were looking for an exit. Every few minutes, she would shift her weight, the wooden pew groaning under her restlessness. She sighed, a long, dramatic sound that cut through the soft organ music. I reached out and took her hand, thinking she was overwhelmed by the emotion. She pulled away to check her watch. 10 minutes before I was due to stand at the podium, as the pastor was reciting a passage about the permanence of the soul, I felt a sharp, insistent tap on my leg. I looked over. Celine was leaning in, the bright light of her phone screen blindingly white against the dim chapel. She had a text message open from her friend, a flurry of emojis and exclamation points about a rooftop brunch downtown. "Can we go?" she whispered, her voice carrying further than she intended. "This is getting so long, and I'm literally starving. I have brunch plans at 1, and we're already behind." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. She wasn't joking. In the middle of the most significant loss of my life, she was worried about missing a bottomless mimosa special. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. She didn't just lack empathy, she lacked a soul. Something in me, the part of me that had been holding on to the idea of us, simply snapped. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "You should go," I said, my voice flat and devoid of the anger I expected to feel. She blinked, looking annoyed. "Finally. Are you coming? We can take your car." I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm staying. You should go now." She huffed, grabbed her designer purse, and stood up. She didn't whisper goodbye. She just clicked her heels down the center aisle, her eyes already back on her phone as she pushed through the heavy oak doors, leaving me alone in the front row. The 3 days following the funeral were a blur of hollow silence and heavy lifting. I spent my time in Arthur's house, packing away the remnants of a life well lived. I found old photographs of him in the war, letters from my grandmother, and a set of keys to a safety deposit box I hadn't known existed. The absence of Celine was a physical relief, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. I expected a call, an apology, some realization on her part that she had abandoned her partner in his darkest hour. But there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no "how are you holding up?" It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment I was no longer a convenient accessory to her social life. I realized now that she was waiting for me to crawl back. In her mind, I was the one who had been difficult. I was the one who had ruined her Tuesday. On Friday afternoon, my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from her. "Are we good?" That was super awkward at the church BTW. I sat on Arthur's porch, looking out at the overgrown garden he used to love, and felt a strange sense of clarity. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to explain why her behavior was monstrous, because if she didn't already know, no amount of words would make her understand. I typed a single period, a full stop, and hit send. Then, with the surgical precision I learned from Arthur, I blocked her number. I blocked her on Instagram, on Facebook, on every digital platform where she might try to project her version of reality onto mine. I felt a surge of autonomy I hadn't felt in months. I was reclaiming my space, my grief, and my future. But Celine was not a woman who accepted rejection quietly. 2 hours later, the unknown call started. I ignored them, letting them go to voicemail, watching the transcriptions pop up like warnings of an approaching storm. "You are being so dramatic, Elias. It was just brunch. My mom says this is narcissistic behavior. You're literally abusing me with a silent treatment. I sat in that dusty church for an hour for you. Do you know how much effort that took?" Each message was a testament to her inability to see anyone's perspective but her own. She didn't mention Arthur once. She didn't ask how the burial went. She only spoke of her own inconvenience, her own support, that lasted 60 minutes and was contingent on a meal. I deleted them all without listening. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I could go back to my morning in peace. I was wrong. Monday evening, a thunderous pounding echoed through my apartment door. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor or the rhythmic tap of a delivery person. It was a demand. I looked through the peephole and saw Celine, her face contorted with a mix of fury and performance, and her best friend Chloe standing behind her like a backup singer. Chloe was filming on her phone, her face set in a mask of righteous indignation. I didn't open the door. I used the intercom, my voice calm but firm. "Leave, Celine." She screamed back. "Open the door. You're stealing my property. You're a thief, Elias. I know you're in there." She began to list the property: a hoodie I'd bought her, a bag of expensive skincare she had left in my bathroom, and a phone charger. I had already packed these things into a grocery bag, anticipating this very moment. I opened the door just enough to slide the bag through the gap. "There's your stuff. Now go." Celine didn't take the bag. She tried to wedge her foot in the door. "What about the festival tickets? You owe me $400 for my VIP pass." 3 weeks prior, she had begged me to buy tickets for a music festival that was still a month away. She had promised to pay me back the moment her paycheck cleared, a promise she had conveniently forgotten until now. I had paid for both tickets on my credit card. I looked at her, at the phone Chloe was holding up to capture my abusive behavior, and I felt a cold resolve. "I paid for the tickets, Celine. You never paid me back. They are mine. They are my name." She screamed that I was a financial abuser, that I was trying to control her by withholding her gift. I slammed the door and locked the deadbolt, the sound of her heels kicking the wood echoing in the hallway. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. The officers were weary, the kind of men who had spent their shift dealing with domestic disputes that were more about ego than actual crime. They stood in my doorway while Celine and Chloe hovered in the background, Celine dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Sir, we have a report of theft," the older officer said, his voice flat. I explained the situation, showing them the receipts for the tickets and the text messages from weeks ago where Celine had promised to reimburse me. I showed them the bag of her belongings that she had refused to take. The officer looked at the property and then at the screaming woman in the hallway. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Celine, "this is a civil matter. He bought the tickets. If you want the money, take him to small claims court. But right now, you are trespassing. The look of pure, unadulterated shock on Celine's face was almost worth the headache. She expected the world to bend to her narrative, to her beauty, to her loud demands. For the first time, it didn't. As they were escorted out, she shrieked that I was a deadbeat and a loser. I went back inside, logged onto the ticket portal, and sold both VIP passes within the hour. I took the profit and donated it to the hospice where Arthur spent his final days. It felt like a cleansing. The following week was a masterclass in digital warfare. Since she couldn't reach me directly, Celine took to social media to craft a story that would make a soap opera writer blush. She posted photos of herself in black and white, looking wistfully out of windows, with captions about surviving toxic masculinity and the pain of being abandoned when you're at your most vulnerable. She didn't mention the funeral. She didn't mention the brunch. She alluded to a mental breakdown I was having, claiming she had been the one paying for everything and that I had kicked her out of our home, an apartment she had never paid a dime toward. I started getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, some expressing concern, others calling me names I won't repeat. It was a smear campaign designed to isolate me, to force me into an apology just to make the noise stop. But Celine made a fatal mistake. She started lying about money. Specifically, she started telling people she had paid for Arthur's funeral because I was too broke and unstable to handle it. This was where I drew the line. Arthur was a man of immense pride, and he had spent his life ensuring he wouldn't be a burden to anyone. He had a prepaid funeral plan dating back to the late 90s, every detail meticulously arranged and paid for in full. I had only paid for the flowers and the wake. To see her use his death as a prop for her financial victimhood was more than I could stand. I didn't engage in a back and forth. I didn't post a long, emotional rant. I simply posted a photo of the funeral contract with the date of payment clearly visible, June 14th, 1998. I captioned it, "Grieving is hard enough without the weight of lies. My grandfather took care of his own. If you weren't there for the eulogy, please don't speak on the costs." The silence that followed was deafening. The mutual friends who had been liking her posts suddenly went quiet. The narrative was crumbling because facts are stubborn things, much like the oak Arthur used to work with. Just when I thought the storm had passed, a new envelope appeared. This wasn't a digital notification. It was a physical invoice taped to my door, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper. It was an itemized bill from Celine. She was charging me for emotional labor during my grieving period, $500. Personal stylist fees for choosing my funeral suit, $200. Time wasted at hospital visits, $600. And of course, the stolen festival tickets, $800. Total, $2,100. I stood in the hallway, staring at the paper, and I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had finally seen the full extent of a person's delusion. She was trying to monetize my grief. She was trying to turn my grandfather's death into a business transaction. It was the ultimate expression of her vacuous nature. Everything had a price, and everyone was a line item. I took the invoice to a lawyer friend of mine. I didn't want to sue her. I just wanted her to stop existing in my orbit. He drafted a cease and desist letter, a formal warning that cited defamation, harassment, and trespassing. We sent it to her mother's house, where she was apparently staying since she couldn't afford her own lifestyle without someone else's credit card. The response was immediate and hysterical. I received a series of voicemails from her mother, a woman who had spent 20 years enabling her daughter's every whim. "How could you do this to my baby? She's distraught. You're a monster, Elias. After everything she did for you." The everything she did apparently amounted to 60 minutes of boredom and an itemized bill for hospital visits. I didn't reply. I sent the voicemails to my lawyer and went back to the workshop. The final escalation came from Chloe, the brunch friend. She sent an anonymous email to the HR department at the architectural firm where I work. She claimed I was unstable, violent, and had stolen thousands of dollars from a vulnerable woman. My boss, a man who had known Arthur and had attended the funeral, called me into his office. He looked at the email, then at me, and sighed. "Breakups are messy, Elias, but this is something else." I showed him the police report, the cease and desist, and the invoice for emotional labor. He read the invoice twice, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. She charged you for visiting your dying grandfather? I nodded. He handed the papers back to me and shook his head. Get some rest, Elias. And maybe get a better security system. This woman is a hurricane. The attempt to ruin my career had failed because, unlike Celine, I had spent years building a reputation based on the very things Arthur taught me. Consistency, honesty, and hard work. It has been a month now. The silence is finally permanent. I heard through the grapevine that Celine has a new boyfriend, a young guy with an expensive car and a look of eager desperation in his eyes. She posted a photo of them at a winery, the caption reading, "Finally found someone who knows how to treat a queen. No drama, just vibes. #upgrade. I looked at the photo once and felt nothing but a profound sense of pity for the man. He doesn't know it yet, but he's not an upgrade. He's just the next line item on our list. He's the next person who will be billed for his own heart. As for me, I finally took Arthur's ashes to the coast. It was a quiet morning, the air cold and sharp, the waves crashing against the jagged rocks with a persistence that reminded me of him. I didn't need a crowd. I didn't need a brunch plan. I just needed the wind and the memories of a man who taught me that the most important thing you can ever build is a life you don't have to lie about. I returned to the workshop that evening. The smell of cedar was still there, faint but lingering. I picked up the plane Arthur had used for 40 years and ran my hand over the steel. It was still sharp, still true. I realized then that the "you should go" I said to Celine wasn't just about the funeral. It was about the life I was refusing to live. I was done with the performative, the shallow, and the loud. I was returning to the quiet. I was returning to the wood. The period I had sent her in that text was the best piece of writing I had ever produced. It wasn't just a punctuation mark. It was a boundary. It was the end of a story that never should have been written, and the beginning of one that was entirely mine. I sat at Arthur's bench, picked up a piece of rough-hewn oak, and began to work. The rhythmic sound of the plane was the only eulogy I needed. I was okay. I was more than okay. I was finally, for the first time in a long time, free. To listen to more stories like this, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next video. Peace out.